All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's limited level ups. We are in a very strange place to be as limited players right now. It feels weird being a limited player and being a limited content creator, just with this set, Spider-Man, being so divisive, controversial, all of the above. It's a weird set, both for the players and I think for the content creators, kind of throwing us for a bit of a loop. And if this was a normal set, like a typical 280 card set, this episode today would normally be the 5 tips for success in the current format. I usually do that after the state of the format address. But with this current format being very much not a typical format, and the set being very small, and ultimately the set being just more shallow than a typical set, I don't know if I could really put together 5 rock solid tips that wouldn't be rehashing things that I said about the format last week. So we've got a bit of a different show today. I do have some Spider-Man related things I want to talk about today, both just big picture, my thought on the set, and 2-pick draft, and 4-player pods, all that kind of stuff, as well as just, card by card, archetype, that kind of usual strategy stuff that I like to cover. But I'll put this here just from the jump. This is probably going to be the last episode I focus on this set at all. You might have seen that Limited Resources posted their Spider-Man Sunset episode. By the way, iconic move. Love that for them. Very quality bit. And I'm going to do something that sort of follows suit, although for slightly different reasons. So if you didn't catch their episode, they basically took the stance of like, yeah, we're both not really interested in this set. And also kind of want to send a message to WotC of, voting with your wallet. And they're basically like, this is all we're going to talk about for this set. This one episode, the episode they put out this week. For me, it's not so much that I don't enjoy the set. Like I mentioned last week, well, the set has problems. Absolutely. I think that the package, like the 180 card package of cards they have, is pretty good. Like, it's shallow. That's my biggest complaint about it. But I've enjoyed my 30 or so drafts I've done. Really, I just don't think I have enough useful, relevant information to share with all of you to have multiple weeks of episodes on this set. And, one of the things I really pride myself on and just try to inject in all of the episodes I put out, all the content, is just, I want the episode to be worth your time, basically. I really want to make sure I'm not rehashing things I've already talked about or other content creators talked about at length. And so I think just after thinking about it, the best way to be respectful of your time as the listener is to not try to be scraping the bottom of the barrel for content of this set for multiple weeks. So for the next month and a bit, before Avatar comes out, we're going to be doing evergreen level up episodes. I think that's going to kind of be the bread and butter. Also, a few interesting things I've planned with other content creators that I'm excited about. And so swinging around to today's episode, because I don't feel like I have enough to talk about for a full hour of just Spider-Man, it's going to be a split episode. First half of the episode, we're going to focus on Spider-Man. Despite all the negative talk about this set on social media, I know there are still a lot of people that are enjoying themselves, want some tips, want some conversation about this set. There's dozens of us out there, I know. And so I do want to make sure that I leave those folks that are still playing the set with everything that I know, everything you kind of wring my brain out for the last few pieces of good, juicy information. And then the second part of this episode is going to be a mini level up episode focused on the 23rd card. So either cutting down from 24, 25, was kind of a tough decision to make, down to 23, or when your draft went a little bit wonky, your 23rd card isn't maybe the best card in the world, and you have to pick between the best of a few bad options. By the way, the irony of me talking about respecting your time and then this being a 4-minute long intro, the irony of that is not lost on me. I apologize for that. Let's get to the good stuff. Let's just jump in. Okay, so first things first here. I've gotten a lot of questions this week just on my thoughts on 2-pick drafts, strategy-wise, also thoughts on the 4-player pods. Also, side note, it's super strange, super weird that best of 3 and best of 1 are different pod sizes. Like, best of 3 is 8-player pods, best of 1 is 4-player pods. I don't know who made that decision. I don't understand the logic. It's very weird. But anyways, so what are my thoughts on 2-pick draft? I've got a few community opinions here I want to just kind of muse on. Martin Yuza on Twitter posted, what are people's thoughts on the new 2-pick draft? Seems like the general sentiment is quite negative. Why is that? I agree, it does seem to be quite negative. He goes on to say, I've actually been enjoying how much faster it is than normal drafts, and while Spider-Man is far from perfect, for the first few drafts, it seems fine. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that I've enjoyed the drafts go a little bit quicker. For me, personally, the worst part of Magic, the actual worst part of Magic, is the downtime. And I'm talking downtime in between draft picks, downtime, when you go to your local game store and you're waiting in between rounds. So anything that keeps me more engaged more frequently, I see as a pro. So yeah, that's one thumbs up for me on the pick 2 draft stuff. My biggest gripe with 2-pick draft is expressed really well by Ben Stark here. So he says, I think it's pretty bad. What makes draft so good is having to consistently reevaluate and value your options every pick. cutting that in half simply makes it much worse. I get it's a way for Commander players to have a 4-person draft pod instead of 8 people, but draft 1 pick per pack should always be the way supported for competition. And yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Like, I really feel there's some nuance kind of lacking in 2-pick draft. I really enjoy gradually figuring out what's open at the table, what colors you're supposed to be in. It really feels like 2-pick draft simplifies that, where your first 2 picks, okay, you take the best cards, and then your pick 2, you hope you have cards of the same color, and then by the time you get to pick 3 or pick 4, you kind of have to make the decision right there, right then. Am I going to pivot to something else, or am I going to stay in my lane? And, you know, it's not 100% one or the other. Sometimes you do kind of hedge a little bit. Sometimes one color is so open that you can just, you know, keep taking white cards, and you're like, all right, I'm going to figure out what my other color is later. But it really feels to me like there are just fewer decision points. I really feel like that, you know, like I mentioned, that nuance of getting into your deck gradually is really lost. So not a really big fan of that. Mike Sigris had a really funny comment, actually. He says, there are too many variables for most people to parse, and a small set means you're playing something closer to team sealed, but you add a 4th teammate, and they're the worst teammate you could ever imagine, and they try to take all the good cards out of your deck. So, you know, what he's gonna get here is, if you haven't played Team Sealed, great format, by the way, is you and 2 friends, so 3 people, open up 12 packs, and you make 3 decks out of those 12 packs. And the main challenge in Team Sealed is generally figuring out, okay, how are we allocating the different colors to different people, right? Because with 3 people, well, Magic has 5 colors, and so one of the colors, at least, is going to have to be shared with somebody else. So you usually have, like, a green-black deck, and you build a blue-red deck, and then your white deck might be sharing the blue cards with the blue-red deck, right? And often the decks that have to share colors will be the weaker decks, right? Because they don't get all the goodies of one color. And the same kind of thing happens in a 4-player pod. Like, usually there's one player that's clearly supposed to be blue-black, one player that's clearly supposed to be green-white, right? We're talking about Spider-Man here. And then the other 2 people, you know, maybe you do get a good red deck, not very common in this format, but maybe somebody gets a good red deck, and then the other person's like, well, I'm sharing colors with at least one other person, maybe 2. In an 8-player pod, this isn't generally a problem, because the people that you're sharing your colors with often aren't seated right beside you, right? And if they are seated right beside you, you have some time to pivot, right, to adjust to that, where I don't think that dynamic really shines through in the 4-player pods. It really does kind of feel like, all right, the person stealing your colors next to you, you know, they have a really, really large impact on your draft, and there isn't often too much you can do to kind of skirt around that. I came across a thread that DeFore posted, just some general thoughts on the set. He only started playing it today, it seems like, judging by the timestamp here. And a lot of things I agreed with it, I want to touch on. So he says, I played some Spider-Man on stream lately, and honestly, it gets more hate than deserved. A lot of people moved on already or judged before playing, but there are a lot of things it does well. So he states some pros and cons. So the pros, 1, skill really matters in a 4-player draft pod. And I think what he means by this, yeah, he clarifies this later. He means that skill in the draft portion specifically means signal reading. And I will say, actually, that this set is really good for training signal reading, because it's a lot more obvious. I think it's a lot clearer. So if you're good at reading signals, I think you're going to be pretty decent at drafting this set. But also, if you're not, if you're somebody who wants to brush up on their signal reading skills, I think this set's a really good training ground for that. One thing that I often say, and something I just think about in the back of my head as I'm drafting, but I say this a lot in my coaching sessions for folks that are having trouble reading signals, is that you want to, at the end of pack 1, just do a little bit of a check-in, saying, you know, roughly ranking 1 to 5, what colors were the most open and what colors were the least open. And, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just getting a general sense, kind of checking in, just so you're not so zoomed in on the cards you've already taken. And I think if you do that with this set, if you say, okay, by the time I get to the wheel, so that's pick 5 in this set, what colors did I think were open in the last few picks, and what colors I think weren't open? And once we've gotten to the wheel here, what colors are still in the pack? Are there solid cards that are wheeling? And in a normal draft with 8 players, things can get a little bit funky. You know, there's a little more variance in there. But with 4 players, like I said, it's just so much more clear. So yeah, I think that's a pro as well. If you are good at reading signals, you're going to excel at this set. And if you're not so good, I think it's a good way to kind of hone that skill. Second pro, he says, is QEV is great. This is a point that is really important to touch on. I don't usually on this channel focus on like the financial side of things or like gem economy or anything. But he's totally right. The EV is very good. 2 wins breaks even. And I think the reason they did this, by the way, is to incentivize people to play this set, because they realize, oh, shoot, People aren't playing this. We got to make the gem payout a little bit better. And so it's very forgiving to play this set and learn this set. So yeah, a little bit of a small note there. And he also notes that the gameplay is pretty good, and I agree with that too. Like the draft portion, I could kind of take or leave, but I found the gameplay to be pretty good. And then for the cons here, and the one I really resonate with is not a ton of depth, and there's only 5 archetypes, and arguably there's only 4 archetypes, with red-black being as bad as it is. And yeah, I think this is the biggest issue with the set. Like, the set's got a lot of issues. The weirdness between digital and paper, this being the first time they're doing 2-pick, 4-player pods. Like, there's a lot of growing pains going on here. But I think if this set was a normal size set, it solves a lot of the issues people have. You really feel just seeing the same decks over and over again, both playing with and playing against. I think one of the things that us limited players value above, constructed players, commander players, is variety, right? We don't really get our kicks by playing the same deck 200 times in a row and trying to optimize the micro decisions. Most limited players I know really like to say, hey, at the end of the format, I got to play all 10 archetypes, or maybe even I trophied with all 10 archetypes, or, I got to build around this sweet, cool build around rare. And with this set, you kind of seen the sights after 15 drafts, I would say. Not to say it's not enjoyable. I don't think, novelty is the end-all be-all, but it's a big part of, I think, what makes limited fun. Okay, let's talk about some cards now. So my view of the format this week is not all that much different than my view of the format last week. Let's just talk archetypes first. So I do think that green-white is the best deck still. It's the one that I've won with the most. It's the one I've gotten into the most. 17 Land says it's the most winning deck. I think it just happens to be the combo of green and white cards are great. The gold cards for green white are really good. It also has some really good rares, so it's not a surprise, that this is the best deck. With green white being the best deck, though, a lot of people are trying to get into it. And because of that, it's created this interesting dynamic where I think blue-black is a deck that's open in a lot of pods, because the opposite, like the non-red opposites of green and white, are blue and black, right? And so, I've had pods where I felt like for the first 2 packs, maybe, I'm the only blue-black drafter, and my deck ends up really, really good. And so that's something I would really recommend looking out for. The most common navigation mistake I see in this format when I'm looking at other people's draft logs is not pivoting to blue-black when you should. And, what that looks like generally is, okay, let's just say you're one of those drafters that started out green-white pack 1. Take good green-white cards, pick 2, probably the same. And then often it's like pick 3 is where you really have to pay attention. Because it's very easy to take like a mediocre green and white card because you're like, oh, I've got awesome green and white cards. Like, I want to keep going on the path. Rather than, pick up the Tyrell, the blue-black 3/1 flying vigilance lifelink, draws cards out of your grave. That card might be in the pack pick 3. And you might pass it over because you're like, I want to dig into my lane. I wouldn't do that in this format. In some formats, I would. Like in a normal draft format, I would. But because I think it's so important to find your lane, like being in the right lane in this format, I'm very likely to take that Tyrell, take that premium uncommon I see of completely different colors, pick 3. And it doesn't mean you have to hard pivot, make that decision right there, right then, where you're like, okay, well, I got a 3rd pick Tyrell, I guess I'm blue-black now. No, it just means that when you get to your next pack, you reevaluate again. I mean, this is just basic draft theory, right? You get to your next pack, you reevaluate again, and you're going to be very, very happy if there's good blue and black cards rather than no green or white cards, which is something that happens pretty often. And going back to this set being a good trading ground for reading signals, I think the skill here is knowing when to hedge, or knowing when it's a really low opportunity cost to take something in a completely different color, right? Like, I'm talking about this situation where there's not really great green or white cards. I mean, maybe there's playable green or white cards like the Caracal, right? Like the 2-mana 2/2 cat that you can pump. That's a perfectly playable card. But at the same time, I'm not very happy to pick that 3rd pick. Tyrell is a busted card. This card is fantastic. You should speculate on that when you're not giving up much for your green-white deck. Again, pretty basic draft theory, I know, but I think in this format, it's just so important to really lock down those skills. So yeah, mostly I've been oscillating between being in green-white and being in blue-black. The 3rd most common deck I draft, though, is blue-white. Really just want to emphasize the importance of the card Wonderweave Aerialist. This is the hybrid 2-drop that has Ward 2 and flying as long as it's modified. I take this card fairly aggressively. If I'm already in blue-white or like leaning that direction, I think this is such a premium important 2-drop. I'm going to almost certainly take it out as one of the cards in the pack. And if I'm not in blue-white, but maybe I'm green-white and I'm trying to feel out the draft still, I'm going to speculate on this card fairly aggressively as well. I see it's sort of similar to how I was talking about pivoting for Tyrell, where if there's nothing awesome in green or white, and I don't really count Wonderweave Aerialist as like a mono white card, by the way. Well, unless you're exactly mono white. What I mean is, it's not a green white card. You can't really count this as a 2-drop in your green white deck. You just won't be able to cast it on turn 2 as often as you'd like to. If you're mono white, okay, sure. But mostly I see this as a blue white gold card, this Aerialist. And yeah, like let's just say I'm green white and I get to pick 3, and there's nothing phenomenal. Maybe some fine fillery green-white cards. I will definitely speculate an Aerialist, because I think this is a really good into getting into this deck. Like I said, I think it's just really important. Note in the hybrid stuff, actually, just reminded me, that's another thing that I've seen a lot this week. People trying to play Aerialist in like a blue-black deck or a white-green deck. It's just not what you want. Like, not only do those colors not have as many ways to modify, so it's mostly just like a 2-mana 2/2, but not casting this card on turn 2 when it's in your opening hand is really, really bad, especially if you don't have another 2 to play. I'm a lot more forgiving of the other common 2-drop hybrid card, the Citizen, the green-white one. 1/1 draws a card, because that's kind of good anytime. I know I'd like to cast on turn 2, but, if you draw on turn 5, that's totally fine too. I've played that more readily in like a blue-white deck, totally. But this one in particular, and any, this goes for any set going forward with very cheap hybrid costs, you can't just jam this into like a green-white deck or something. The more expensive the hybrid card gets, the more it's okay, because you'll likely have these colors. Like if this was a 4-mana card in your green-white deck, okay, that's not that bad. But yeah, it's really like the cheap cards you have to worry about. Okay, other archetypes. So there was the emergence of green-black as kind of the go-to enemy color pair deck that actually kind of works. Sam Pratt, Rough Draft Sam, put out an episode this week talking about green-black, where he describes it as like a green-black graveyard recursion deck. Pretty interesting if you want to go check that out. I haven't drafted that too much myself, once or twice, but yeah, it's a thing that can work. Like, you can either have green-black be the base of, some sort of graveyard deck or a multicolor deck. And then with the red decks, my thoughts haven't really changed on them. I think green-red is like a totally fine deck to draft if green is very open, and then you get the red, green, gold cards. As much as I think red is pretty weak, I think the red, green, gold cards are fairly solid, and you can cherry pick some other red cards. And then with red, black, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think things have shaken out in a way that makes red, black any more playable than I thought it was last week. If you didn't catch last week, I was just talking about how the synergies with this deck, the Mayhem synergies, they just don't really work because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You go through all this work to get like a slightly discounted creature in most cases. I will say, though, if you're, like, really into this format, like, if you're one of the people who is on their 30th, 40th draft, and you want to try something a little bit different, and you're like, okay, maybe this will be the draft where red-black is what I'm supposed to do. I think there is one card in the format that pulls me into saying, like, oh, this is actually a good reason to do the Mayhem thing. And that's Quint's Insight, which is 1 red for an enchantment at rare. At the beginning of your first main phase, you discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And whenever you play a land or cast a spell from anywhere but your hand, this enchantment deals 1 damage to each opponent. If you have a lot of Mayhem cards in your deck, this is just a card advantage engine, right? And a mana advantage engine as well, because it makes your Mayhem cards cheaper, because you get to Mayhem them. This is the engine this kind of deck needs to really just accrue a bunch of advantage, because it's really hard to get repeated advantage in this red-black deck. So yeah, I'm not trying to say, like, oh yeah, if you open up Quint's Insight, you should take it. I am trying to say, though, like, if you do want a little bit of excitement, a little bit of a challenge, I think this is a good into that, right? This is the one card that really would make me comfortable saying, okay, let's go all in on the Mayhem stuff. All right, next up, I've got a list of overrated and underrated cards I want to talk about, as well as just a few cool interactions to call out. So, first card on, I would say, the underrated list, this is Scions of the Earth Spider. This is the 5-color mythic, 5/5, flying, lifelink, trample, haste, first strike, at the beginning of combat on your turn. Other spiders gain those abilities. We've had a really long string of bad 5-color cards in our limited sets, and this one's really good. This one is worth it. And this is also a set with really good fixing, pretty good multicolor fixing, and there's multiple 5-color fixers. When you consider, there's the Manolith, the Treat Trolley. I would play that card if I had Scions. There's a few other cards that make multiple colors of mana, Treasure Makers. So this card's pretty castable. You have to be heavy green, of course, but I wouldn't shy away from first picking this card. On the flip side of things here, the other rare that I want to call out is Laszlo, Enthusiastic Accusers. This is 2 red for a 2/2 legend at rare. When it enters, you suspect up to 1 target creature, which means that creature cannot block and has menace. And whenever a creature you control with menace attacks, you make a treasure token. Yeah, this card is quite bad, and I see it a lot. Like, this is a card I'm just shocked how much I see on the other side of the battlefield. I imagine it has something to do with a very alluring gold symbol in the corner. People like putting rares in their deck. But just like look at what you're getting for this card, right? It's a 3-mana 2/2. That's bad. When it enters, you suspect one target creature. That's not even necessarily a good thing, right? Like, okay, the idea is you maybe suspect your opponent's creature and they can't block, or you suspect your own and it's a bit of a better attacker. Neither of those really make up for the fact that you're playing a 3-mana 2/2. And the reason I say it's not necessarily even a good thing is because, like, you know, there's downside in other situation where you suspect your own creature. Okay, now it can't block. You suspect the opponent's creature. Okay, well, now it's a better attacker. And, you know, sure, there's going to be a lot of game states where it's like, well, I would clearly give my opponent's creature menace if it means they can't block. But there's also a lot of game states where the game's kind of close. And it's like, okay, well, they don't have a good block this turn, but then they get to crack me back for, you know, 4. Maybe you make their biggest thing not be able to block. And then that last ability, the whenever you attack with a creature with menace, make a treasure token, fairly minor. So yeah, just thought I'd call it out. If you want to consult the numbers, 17 lands also says this card is a very, very, very poor win rate. It's also a red card which contributes, but yeah, just don't put this card in your deck. Only one other card here on the overrated list, and this is Eccentric Arachnologist. This is the 3-mana 2/3, taps to add mana of any color. You also pay 3 to tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on target spider. Yeah, this is a card that, just like the last card, I see on the battlefield a lot, and it's not as bad. It's not as embarrassing as Laszlo, is that rare? But I think people are kind of seeing this as just like a fine card to put in their deck. And I think you really need a reason to put it in your deck. And that reason isn't just, I have spiders. It's, I have a lot of expensive things. I'm, you know, maybe you have that 5-color rare I was just talking about. Like, I would play this card then. But just like Laszlo, like, kind of look at the mana cost, look at what you're getting. You're getting a 3-mana 2/3. Not great. With a mana ability, like, that is good. And then the activated ability, I've just found this comes up so infrequently. Like, not that I don't appreciate a mana sink, but, like, this just isn't the kind of mana sink I'm looking for. Like, when I'm running out of things to do, putting a counter on a creature for 3 whole mana just doesn't feel like it solves the problem of being flooded. So yeah, this card's not unplayable or anything, but I just wouldn't see it as like a bread and butter common. I think you need a reason to play it. Okay, the underrated card list. So I think top of the heap, and maybe not underrated by a bunch, but by enough to mention, is Terrific Team Up. This is the 4-mana instant uncommon. It costs 2 mana if you control a permanent with mana value 4 or greater. And it says 1 or 2 creatures you control get +1/+0, and they deal their damage to target creature an opponent controls. Obviously a strong card, but I want to call it out because I think it's an excellent uncommon, just like so premium. And I'll get this 3rd pick sometimes, which I just, you know, it's hard for me to construct a pack where that would be the right thing to do, especially because that means in 2-pick draft, this is merely the 5th best card in the pack, right? So this card, because it's only 2 mana so much of the time, extremely efficient removal spell. It also does the thing where you can sometimes 2-for on your opponent, right? Like, I had a situation the other day, the opponent's attacking me with 2 2/2s, I have a 1/4, I cast this card, kill a 2/2, eat the other one, right? That's the kind of thing you can do with this card. So it's the combo of efficiency, sometimes being a 2-for-1, pushing damage, trading up in combat, usually being able to kill anything in the format as long as you have 2 creatures. So yeah, just take this card a little bit higher, even though you probably might already think it's a pretty good card. Next one here is Sarn of the Silken Throne. This is 4 mana for a 3/4 and whip cost of 3. At the beginning of your end step, if there are 2 more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card, and then gain 2 life. Yeah, this one's kind of similar, where I don't think people think this is a bad card or anything, but I see this as a premium uncommon. When you have Sarn, you really, really want Pigeon, City Pigeon. I mean, it's true with any web card, of course. But on turn 4, when you're able to go pick up my Pigeon with Sarn, replay the Pigeon, draw a card immediately, it's just, you know, it doesn't feel like game over necessarily for the opponent, but it's an uphill battle, right? You've gained life, you've drawn a card. If this sticks around, you get to do it again. And also just a gameplay tip with Sarn. I would really try to, if I could, get my card off of it when I cast it. Because, you know, this is a removal magnet. People want to kill it. I really want to try to line it up so I draw my card right away. Fearsome Ridgeline is the uncommon colorless land that you can tap, pay 1 to add a mana of any color. Also pay 1 tap. Target legendary creature gains menace until end of turn. Activate that only as a sorcery. So during the set review with Mark, Mark asked me, do you think you're going to be using this card for mana fixing more or for the activated ability? Or I guess putting it in your deck more for one or the other. And, you know, intuitively, I kind of thought, okay, you know, lands are good for mana, generally. But I've definitely found that hasn't been true. I mean, sure, it's a fine fixer if you need the fixing. A little clunky because, you know, your card costs 1 more. But I've really found that menace ability has come up a ton. So I kind of thought of this card at first as like, oh, you're only going to play it when you splash. I've played it in 2-color decks before, where I've got like 6, 7 legends. I also have got at least 3 wins where my opponent just didn't realize that this is what the card did, and they left back 1 fewer blockers than they should have. So you might get a free win here and there. But yeah, just something to call out. Worth playing if you've got 6 or 7 legends, even if you're not splashing. Next card up is Goro Rel, Scourge of Spiders. This is a 2-mana, 2/1 artifact creature that when it deals combat damage to a spider, destroy that creature. And you can pay 6, exile it from your grave, make 2 1/1 flyers. This card is just generically good. I called it out last week, but I want to call it out again because it's another card that I get quite late. Sometimes on the wheel. It's not like a premium uncommon or anything, but it's above average. Best in the villain deck, of course, when you sometimes mill it or discard it, but I would play this card basically anytime. Like a 2-mana 2/1 that you can exile from your grave for 2 flyers, that's just good. That's just a good limited magic card. Last card to call out here is Drix Interception. 1 blue, instant, choose one or both, either counter target spell or tap 1 or 2 target creatures. I really like this in like the blue-black tempo-y kind of villain deck, because often you're able to leave mana up in that deck, so you're able to keep up the counter spell. But also, a lot of the time, you just go, oh, top deck this, lethal, right? And just having that kind of modality in a tempo deck is really good. Also, if your opponent has this card or they're playing blue or you suspect they have this card, make sure you cast your spells main 2. This card really learns you good. It really punishes you for casting your spell main 1 when you're going for an attack. So yeah, just something to note. And yeah, I've been happy playing 2 copies or so in my villain decks. All right, and then to close out our Spider-Man talks, I was going to say for today, but for the format, I suppose, I just want to touch on a few cards with some little quirks. So, first one here is the Infernus. This is one of the few good red cards. This is the 2 in a red 0/0 that it gets +1/+1 for each mountain you control. When it enters, you search your library for a mountain, put it on the battlefield, and when it leaves, you sack the land. So, twice this week, I have seen my opponents cast this off of a dual land, right? Like a red-green dual land, without any other mountains in play. You can't do that, because it will just die, and you won't get anything for it. So, don't do that. Another card, a little bit weird. Romantic Rendezvous. This is the 1 red sorcery that you can discard a card, then draw 2 cards. Yeah, I say a little bit weird because this is not the normal template for this card, so you might not know this card's different than your typical Tormenting Voice kind of effect. So the thing that's different about this card is that you don't actually need to discard a card to draw 2 cards. I mean, you have to if you have a card in hand, but if this is the last card in your hand, you can just draw 2. I've seen a lot of people pitch a land to this, so they're going to just play the land and draw there too. Discarding a card is not a cost. You just get to draw 2 if your hand is empty. There's an interesting little trick with the cards that have bad templating in this format. So the cards like Trail of Teacups or Kazuo, who make you target your own creatures if your opponent doesn't have any creatures. So if you only have 1 creature, and your opponent casts one of these, and you've got the card Spectacular Tactics in your hand, the white protection spell, gives something hexproof and a +1/+1 counter. What you want to do to really get your opponent good is cast Tactics on your only creature, give it hexproof, while these cards are on the stack, while Trail or Kazuo or any of the other kind of cards like this are on the stack. Because what will happen is you go, okay, they cast Trail, you cast Tactics, give your creature hexproof, they can't choose your creature as a target, right? So they have to target one of their own creatures. Where if you wait until the trigger goes on the stack, sure, you can give your creature hexproof, but they're not going to be forced to target something else because your hexproof creature was a legal target at the time. And then the last card I want to call out is the Scouring Soulstorm, which is 1 green for a star rare. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less, and for 5 mana, you can return this card and target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. So when I have this card, I very highly prioritize Vibrant Cityscape. That's the fetch land, the Evolving Wild variant. Like, when you have this card and Soulstorm in your deck, you can just keep bringing it back, right? Because you just keep putting the land in the graveyard. And it's much worse. This Soulstorm is much worse when you don't have Cityscape, because there's really not that many ways to put lands in the graveyard in this set. There's a little bit of self-mill here and there in black, but other than that, it's pretty difficult. I guess conniving. Conniving is the other way. But even if you do have other ways to put lands in the graveyard, Vibrant Cityscape is so much better than any of those other ways. And just before we get to the level up section of our episode, I want to call out the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. Also the accompanying Discord, Limited Level Ups Discord. Links to those are in the description of the YouTube video and the podcast feed. If you want to support the show, if you want to support my content, Patreon's the absolute best way to do it. We've got a bunch of different tiers over there offering a bunch of different rewards. If you want to support the channel in a different way, like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube video. That goes a really long way. I also want to say a big thank you to people who commented on the State of the Forum Address episode who were like, hey, I'm not really planning to play much Spider-Man. I'm not really planning to play this set, but, I'm here to hear you talk about Magic. So yeah, just very appreciative of that. I want to say thank you for those folks who took the time to comment and those who are just here for the love of the game, All right, let's get back to the show. So, getting your deck down to 23 cards, how to pare it down, how to make those last few cuts when you've ended up with 25, 26 playables. This is something that I do like all day, every day, because when I'm doing deck techs in my Discord, like this is what I'm looking for generally. Generally, people are looking for like, okay, what are the last few cuts here? You know, I've got a pretty good pile of cards. These all look pretty good. I'm not sure where I should look, how I should pare this down. I'm not sure the process I should go through to get to 23 cards. I'll start with the idea that I'm sure a lot of people know, but maybe haven't fully internalized, is that you shouldn't play more than 40 cards, right? Like, there's no real argument for playing more than 40. I've heard some kind of like half-hearted arguments, but if your goal is to win, if your goal is to draw the best cards in your deck as often as possible, you should make that cut. It might be a tough cut, right? Like, often when you're making these cuts, you're cutting good cards. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a tough decision at all, right? You're just be like, okay, you cut the bad card. You will be cutting a good card most often, and this can feel bad, right? It kind of feels like you're losing out on something, like a little bit of sunk cost fallacy, where it's like, I already drafted this card, like I should probably play it. But yeah, the core idea behind getting down to 40 is that you're gonna have, what, 2, 3, 4 cards in your deck that are much better than the rest of the cards in your deck. So like the rares you've picked up, maybe some premium uncommons, and you want to have those cards in your opening hand. You want to have those cards in your top 10 cards. You want to see those cards more often. And every card past 40, it adds up. It really does. And I think that's a reason why people play more than 40 sometimes, or like they kind of think it's acceptable or not that bad, because they think, oh, it's one more card. You know, 41 cards. What difference does that make? It's a percentage point, right? Like, it's maybe multiple percentage points. I was streaming this week, and Sirkovitz was in my stream, and he said something I really loved. He said, 66% win rate is really a bunch of 1% win rates in a trench coat, right? The idea being, like, you know, no player, none of their individual decisions, none of their individual plays, the cards they take, none of those give you a 66 win percentage on their own. It's all the small decisions you make, like every small decision in the draft, in the deck build, in the game. Those all add up to getting a very high win rate like some people achieve. And when you play 41 cards, that's a percentage point you're taking off. I've also seen the case where somebody's trying to make a cut down to 40, and they're looking at all their different cards, their different effects, and they're like, well, like, it would be nice to have one more removal spell, or it would be nice to have this removal spell that targets flyers. You know, what if I run up against a flyer? And it's this idea of like, well, what if I need this? It would be nice to have the chance to draw this, right? And I just don't think that's the way you want to think about it. Like, you want to make your deck as consistent as possible, do the same thing, you know, whatever your deck's plan is. And of course, there's going to be times where you're like, oh man, that disenchant or that destroy target creature with flying card, that would be pretty good here. It's all about averages though, right? On average, how will your cards perform? How good are they going to be? You don't need access to every single effect to win a game of Magic. You just need access to the effects and the card types and the numbers of card types that are good for your kind of deck. A slight variant of this comes up when it's like, okay, you're looking at the cards in your deck and you're saying, well, I can imagine this card being pretty good in my deck, but maybe it's just a pretty weak card. So I have an example here. Blue-black deck in front of me. Drafted this with somebody in a coaching session this week. And if you're not watching along, it's kind of like a blue-black tempo-y deck. It's got a lot of cheap flyers. And usually in coaching sessions, what we do is like, you know, we'll draft the deck, and before I say anything, you know, we'll end up with our pile of cards and say, okay, you know, you build the deck, and if I would do anything differently, you know, I'll let you know. And so the person pared it down to 41 cards, and we got to this. That's what's in front of me. And so if you're watching along, you want to guess what the cut, my cut down to 40 was, then, you know, feel free. But spoiler alert, I suggested we cut Crash, Reckless, and Rider. This is the 2 Rakdos Hybrid 2/3. At the beginning of your main phase, you can discard a card. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, Crash deals 1 damage to that player. So, I mean, it kind of roughly does what you would want in a tempo aggressive deck, right? Like, it maybe makes something not be able to block, maybe deals a little bit of damage. It's a villain, which of course matters in this deck. But there's 2 things going on here where I don't think this card is actually a very good fit with this deck. Number 1, I see Crash as mostly a synergy card. Like, this is a card you need to be discarding Mayhem cards to really make it good. The baseline of 3 mana 2/3, that's just not good, and the abilities here don't quite make up for 3 mana 2/3 not being good. That's the second time I've said that today, by the way. Remember, 3 mana 2/3 is not good. That's the real level up today. And the other thing is like, well, you can imagine that in an aggressive deck, making the opponent's creatures not be able to block, that sounds pretty good, or maybe dealing, you know, a point of damage here and there. But the thing is, that ability is not going to matter that much in this deck because so many of the creatures in this deck are flying, and those cards get in naturally. So I think the mistake here was, 1, the person kind of misevaluating just the raw power level of this card, of Crash, not really recognizing it's a synergy card, but 2, also not recognizing that, hey, it kind of plays well in this aggressive tempo-y space, but if you look at the specifics of our deck, we have a bunch of flyers, it doesn't actually work very well. So it's an easy cut for me. So yeah, if you're a chronic 40 card player, just remember, consistency is a powerful thing. And also when you're trying to make that tough cut, like if you're really hemming and hawing, like if you're just sitting there looking at your deck being like, my deck is busted, every single card is so good, how am I expected to cut something? Well, if everything is really good, then whatever card that you have to cut, even if you cut the wrong card, right? Like it ends up you're trying to figure out, okay, what's strategically the best card to cut here? Even if you cut the wrong card and keep the wrong card, if you really think it's a close decision, then you won't be making that big of a mistake, right? That's a good thing just in life, but in Magic this comes up a lot. Whenever you have a close decision, if you're like thinking about it for so long, you really can't decide, that means that whatever one you choose is going to be pretty right. And it's going to be only off by a little bit if you make the decision wrong. Which is basically just to say, don't stress yourself out too much about making that cut. It's more important that you get down to 40 than it is that you make the absolute right cut as the last card. So let's talk about the process here. How do I actually think about things and pare things down to 40? Well, I mean, the most obvious one, and I think the most common one when you're making cuts, is you just cut the worst cards, right? And if you're having trouble figuring out what your worst cards are, that's probably an indicator that you just don't know the set all that well just yet, right? And of course, at the beginning of the format, this is going to be common. I look back at a lot of my early drafts of whatever format it is and go like, oh man, I played that card. Yikes. And that's just one thing to keep an eye on, I'd say, as you're learning a set, as you're, just as you do more drafts, it should become easier to make your cuts. And if it's not becoming easier and you're like, I really don't know, then, I always recommend a trip over to 17 Lands, looking at the data there, or the limited level ups tier list. If you want just a quick little check-in on how good a card is, it's always there. Always in the description. I also think these are the most effective cuts too. Out of all the categories of reasons you might want to cut a card out of a deck, just cutting the bad card, the low win percent card, whatever it is. It's talking about your win percentage being a bunch of 1% in a trench coat, and just cutting a bad card, that's going to give you 1, 2, 3%. Over the course of your games. When I'm doing a gameplay review, so I'm looking at somebody's gameplay log, oftentimes there won't be like a critical, terrible mistake they made, or maybe even they played very well and there's not even a small mistake they made, but they drew the worst card in their deck in their opening hand all of their games, or all of their losing games. And that's what really had an impact on their games. And, I look at the sideboard and there's a better card they could have played, and, if that was just swapped in, maybe it would have made a difference. So yes, a very complex and nuanced point I'm trying to get at here, which is play the good card. Another pretty common place to look when you're looking to cut something is just cut your splash. So I've got a deck in front of me here, and it's a really, really strong green-white deck. We've got 2 copies of Janai and Hoppy. We've got 2 copies of Alessos and Pras, so these are the 2 green-white gold cards. Got 3 City Pigeons, we've got 2 Spectacular Tactics, 2 Mothwing Shrouds, like just really, really strong deck in general. 3 Gallant Citizens in the 2-drop slot, and we're splashing Angler's Shield, which is the blue-white rare equipment that gives the creature +2/+2, it auto-equips, equip for 2, and when it deals combat damage, you draw a card for each modified creature you control. It's a strong card, obviously, and we have a little bit of fixing to cast it. We've got a Vibrant Cityscape, we're playing an island. We've got Zan, which is the in-web creature that goes and gets a basic land. So we've got our 3 sources here. But I would recommend cutting the splash here, because anytime I don't have to splash, that's a benefit, right? Unless my deck is just absolutely designed to splash. You've got a ton of fixing. That's not what this deck's doing. This deck is both very powerful and doesn't have the best fixing in the world. It kind of has like just enough. Also, this deck does have 3 copies of Gallant Citizen, like a Selesnya hybrid card. So playing an island is actually a pretty big cost, right? Like having an island and Citizen in your opening hand generally is pretty bad. So yeah, really you're just weighing 2 factors here. You're weighing how strong is my deck in general and how good is my mana fixing. And the better your deck is, the less likely I am to splash, and of course the worse your fixing is, the less likely I am to splash. I think a pretty common place people go for their cuts is cutting a card that they have multiple copies of. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, but sometimes it's not. And the times when it's not is when you have a good card that doesn't have diminishing return. Like, it totally makes sense to cut down on your 4th, City Pigeon, let's just say, right? Like, there's some diminishing returns there. Drawing 3 pigeons in your open hand, not great. But I wouldn't really want to cut a copy of Gallant Citizen, for example, because I don't really think Gallant Citizen has diminishing returns. I'm kind of just happy to draw it whenever. This sort of goes back to the idea of the fallacy of being like, oh, it'd be nice to have this effect, right? It's kind of the opposite of that, where it's like, well, I already have this effect. Do I need more of it? And if the card is good and doesn't have diminishing returns, then yeah, you just want more copies of that card, right? And what it means for a card to have diminishing returns, that comes in various forms, right? It could be an expensive card, it could be a legendary card, it could be removal, honestly, because like you don't want too much removal. It could be a 2-drop that isn't great to draw in the late game. Some cards have different levels of diminishing returns, or they like drop off steeper after the second copy versus the third or fourth for some other cards. Same goes for drafting too, by the way. Like, I've heard the same logic. It's like, oh, we've already got some of this, you know, maybe we want the other thing. And yeah, of course, in some spots, but if your card is just good at all points of the game, isn't expensive, yeah, you'll probably just play as many copies as you can. Another really good place to look for your cut is a card that needs a little bit of help or needs some specific deck building requirements, needs some synergy, and didn't quite get there. So I've got a few examples here. I think Wekdu Midnight Hunter is a pretty good example of this. This is the 3-mana 2/2 Flash Flyer with Mayhem for a single black mana. I really like this card if you've got connive cards, if you've got ways to discard. But if you've got like one way to discard Wekdu, and 90% of the time it's going to be a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, that's not quite good enough, right? So that would be a place to cut, and especially kind of insidious, because if you're somebody who does look at 17 lands, or, you know, even tier lists, like a non-data tier list, you can see like, oh, Wekdu's pretty good, you know, a C, C+, but I imagine a lot of that is coming from people being able to mayhem it on one, right? So you gotta ask yourself, hey, is my card actually good in my deck? Because sometimes it's just not. There are some cards where, you know, if you get to do the thing, if you have the synergy for it, it becomes really, really good. And then if you don't have the synergy, it's like, okay, it's just fine still. And it's really important, I think, to make the distinction between cards like Wekdu and cards that might just be fine on their own, you know, have a good power and toughness and effect to their mana cost, and have some ceiling if you do have some synergy in your deck. Another example of this is Rouse the Swarm. This is the 4-mana green enchantment that makes a 2/1 spider when it enters, and you gain a life for each spider you control, and spiders you control get +1/+1 and can't be blocked by creatures with Defender. I mean, even in green-white, I've drafted decks in this format where I've had a Rouse the Swarm, and I draft green-white, and green-white's the deck with the highest density of spiders, and I go, you know what, this is probably my last cut out of this deck. Strong card, you know, really good uncommon, but I actually somehow only ended up with 3 spiders, right? And if this is a 4-mana 3/2 reach that gains me 1 life, more often than not, it's not a good card. And I think if you're really having a tough time deciding what your cuts are, it's never a bad idea to just kind of keep your fundamentals in mind. So what I mean by that is you've got a red-white deck. I guess not in this format very often, but you've got a red-white deck in some format, and you've got 14 creatures, 10 non-creatures, and you're trying to make cuts. Well, I would immediately go to the non-creatures first, because 14 is already pretty low for like a red-white aggro deck in most formats. You really want to be at that 15-16 range. Same kind of thing goes for curve, right? How many 2-drops do you have? Well, if you're overloaded on 2-drops, you've got like 10 of them. Okay, that's an easy place to make a cut. But if you've only got 6 2-drops, yeah, of course I'm not making a cut there, even if my worst card, my quote-unquote worst card, let's just say it's the 2/1 artifact creature that goes and gets a land, like, even if that's the worst card in my deck, I'm still going to have to keep that around just because my curve needs it, right? The fundamentals of my deck need it. And then on the other side of things, where you're trying to get to 23, right? Your draft went a little bit off the rails and there's not obviously 23 good playables. That's where I would go to for figuring out what the last card you have to play is. Because often that last card or last 2 or 3 cards are not going to be good. You're not going to be happy about putting them in your deck. So if they're underpowered, I at least want them to fill a certain role in my deck. So maybe I play a Temple Trap. Actually, I played a decent amount of Temple Trap in this format. That's the 5-mana artifact that deals 5, and you can discard it for 2 mana to destroy an artifact. You know, if you're low on removal, if you've got 3 removal spells only, then yeah, Temple Trap's a good card to bring in as your 23rd. Or if you've got 13 creatures and you just need a creature, you just need a 2-drop. That's most often what I'm trying to aim for when I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I fill in this deck? Because you don't really have the luxury of being like, yes, this is the 23 most perfect cards for my deck. I think the best you can often hope for in that situation is having functional mana, a functional curve, a functional ratio of creatures and non-creatures. I think those are your goals there when you're trying to get to 23 good cards. And also, you know, don't forget the tried and true. You can always play 18 lands. Sometimes your 23rd card is worse than a basic land. It doesn't happen all that often where your 23rd playable ends up being worse than a basic land. You know, these days sets generally have good playables, but especially, like, another thing that can happen in drafts that go a little bit wonky is you have to end up splashing, right? And so if I'm splashing and I think my last playable, my 23rd card, isn't great, adding a basic land to go to 18 lands is actually a pretty good idea, because anytime I can add more land sources, more mana sources to make my mana better when I'm splashing, that's a good thing to do. Anyways, That's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for watching and listening. And once again, thanks for sticking with us on this really weird limited journey we're going on in the next little while. Like, I've been posting some Final Fantasy videos because it's a really fun format. I think it's like my favorite format of all time at this point. And we've got more flashbacks coming next week. But yeah, let me know what you want to see, both in terms of level ups. You know, I'm always willing to take suggestions on those. I've got a running list of things I want to cover eventually, but always happy to add things to that list. And yeah, as far as gameplay goes, let me know too. Like, I'm not opposed to uploading Spider-Man gameplay, if that's what people want to see. It's a little bit shallow. I probably won't go back to it for my 50th draft, but you know, like I said, I'm still kind of in that 30-ish range. I've still got a few more in me. Anyways, thanks for watching and listening. If you made it this far, check out the Patreon, like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.